Ever get that sinking feeling?
Yeah.
Like when your head's down working on a project and suddenly, bam, another urgent request comes down.
Oh, yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
So today, we're going to do a deep dive into some practical advice for navigating these top-down demands. It's almost like a survival guide for your sanity.
I like that, a survival guide.
Right,
Yeah.
because sometimes it feels like that.
It does.
And it's interesting because the source we're looking at today actually says that these demands aren't always a bad thing. Sometimes they can actually be good. It's more about learning how to manage them.
Okay, hold on. How could a demand be good? I mean, isn't the whole point of a demand that it's something you have to do, whether you like it or not?
That's a good point to me, but think about it this way. A good demand aligns with your team's overall goals.
Mm-hmm.
It addresses a real need, not just a whim. And ideally, there's room for you to use your expertise in how you execute it.
So it's less about being micromanaged and more about getting clear direction, but with the flexibility to figure out the how on our own.
Exactly.
Right. But let's be honest. Not all demands are created equal. The source points out that bad demands often lack that clear why. They might be based on gut feelings rather than data, or they just totally disregard the team's current workload.
Yeah. Those are the ones that make you want to slam your laptop shut. Like,
Yeah.
sure, we'll drop everything we're doing for this new shiny object, even though it has zero connection to our actual goals.
Yeah, and those are the types of demands that can really hurt morale. It sends the message that the person at the top doesn't really trust the team's judgment.
Okay, so enough complaining.
Yeah.
We all know these demands are just a fact of life. What does this source say we can actually do about them?
Well, it outlines 4 techniques.
Okay.
And the first one is deceptively simple. Start with why.
You know, it's funny how we often jump straight into execution mode. Without even questioning the purpose, we just assume that the person giving the demand has thought it all through.
Right.
And they haven't always...
Yeah, and this source encourages us to push back a little, respectfully, of course.
Yeah.
Ask things like, what's the desired outcome here? Are there any specific metrics that we're aiming for? Have we explored other solutions?
I like that. It's not about being defiant. It's about getting on the same page.
Exactly. The source gives this example of a CEO requesting a new dashboard. Instead of just blindly saying yes, you might ask, what decision will this dashboard help you make? What data points are we hoping to uncover? That way you're both aligned on the purpose.
So persuasion over blind obedience.
Right.
I can get behind that.
Yeah.
Okay. What's technique number 2?
This one builds on that idea of questioning assumptions, and it uses what's called the CSD Matrix.
Wait, a matrix? That sounds kind of intimidating.
It's not that bad, I promise. CSD stands for certainties, suppositions, and doubts. And you basically take the details of the request and categorize them.
So certainties are things that we know for sure. Suppositions are things that we think are true. And doubts are, well, are uncertainty.
Exactly. And the real magic happens when you start challenging the certainties. The source suggests asking, how do we know this is true?
Okay, so it's like a tool for poking holes in those assumptions
Yeah.
that often come along for the ride with top-down demands.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
It's about respectfully pushing back and ensuring you're working from a solid foundation, not just blindly accepting things at face value.
I once used a version of this without even realizing it. We were about to implement a new feature based on what everyone assumed was a rock-solid user request.
Oh, interesting. And what happened?
Well, I started digging, and it turned out that the data was outdated. By questioning that certainty, we avoided a huge waste of time and resources. So this matrix thing, it actually works.
That's great to hear. It just goes to show how important it is to have that critical thinking mindset, even when the pressure is on.
Okay, so we've covered starting with why and challenging assumptions. What's next on our list of top-down survival tactics?
Technique number 3 is all about taking a more strategic approach to your workflow. Specifically, it talks about something called upstream thinking and using the Kanban method.
Okay, confession time. I know a little bit about Kanban, but honestly, it's mostly just using those visual boards with the columns and sticky notes. Is that what we're talking about here?
Kanban boards are definitely helpful, but the source emphasizes that it's more about the method itself. Think of it as a way of thinking about your work, not just a way of tracking it.
So what exactly is upstream thinking, and how does it fit into all of this?
Most teams are really good at what we call downstream work. That's the actual execution of tasks.
Okay.
But they often neglect the upstream part, where those tasks originate.
Let me see if I get this. It's like in a restaurant. The chefs are focused on cooking and plating the food. That's downstream. But someone needs to be thinking about the menu, Ordering ingredients and making sure the kitchen is stocked, right? That's the upstream.
Perfect analogy. And that's where Kanban comes in. It helps you visualize that entire workflow from the initial request to the final delivery and manage it in a way that prevents those constant fire drills.
So instead of letting a top-down demand just jump the queue and disrupt everything, it goes through the same process as any other task.
Exactly. And using a Kanban board can be a great visual way to manage that. But again, it's the mindset shift that's important. Think about how WIP limits, for example, could help you manage those last-minute requests that always seem to come down the pipeline.
For those who haven't encountered Kanban before, WIP stands for Work in Progress. Essentially, you set limits on how many tasks can be in progress at any given time.
Right, and that helps prevent overload and keeps things flowing smoothly. If you're constantly hitting your WIP limit, it might be time to push back on some of those new demands.
Makes sense. This whole approach makes a lot of sense. It's about creating a system that works for the team, not just for the person issuing the demand.
And that's key for maintaining morale and preventing burnout.
Okay, all of this is super helpful, but let's be realistic. Sometimes you've got a deadline looming and you just have to get things done, even if it means dealing with a less than ideal request.
Yeah. Technique number 4 addresses that. Sometimes the most efficient approach is just to execute. If it's a quick task, it fits into your existing workflow, and it truly is urgent, then by all means go for it.
Okay, but I'm sensing a but coming.
Of course, you don't want to become a yes person to everything that comes your way. It's about finding that balance between being helpful and setting healthy boundaries.
So how do we walk that tightrope? How do we know when to push back and when to just roll with it?
It's about being strategic with your no. You have to assess each situation carefully. Is this request reasonable? Will it derail our progress on other important goals? Do we have the capacity to take it on? Sometimes saying no can actually lead to a better outcome for everyone involved.
I feel like this ties back to the why technique. If you don't understand the rationale behind the demand, it's much harder to assess whether it's even worth saying yes to.
You're absolutely right. It all comes back to having that clear understanding of the purpose and the desired outcome.
Okay, so we've got these 4 great techniques, but let's be honest. Dealing with constant demands, even if we're managing them well, can take a toll. How do we protect our mental health in this kind of environment?
That's a great question. And thankfully, the source offers some guidance on that as well. It's about building resilience and prioritizing self-care.
Okay, tell us more. We could all use some extra resilience these days.
Well, it starts with setting clear boundaries, like we talked about earlier. If your manager expects you to work late every night when a new demand comes in, you need to set expectations around your workload and availability.
Boundaries are so important. It's about protecting your time and your energy, making sure you're not burning out.
Absolutely. And it goes hand in hand with practicing that strategic no. You have to be willing to push back when a request is unreasonable or simply not feasible.
It's like that saying, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. We have to advocate for ourselves and our teams.
Another key tip is creating slack in your workload. If you're constantly operating at 100% capacity, there's no room for those unexpected demands or shifts in priorities.
It's like trying to cram one more suitcase into an already overflowing car trunk. Something's got to give. We need that breathing room to avoid feeling completely overwhelmed.
Exactly. And it can be helpful to remember not to take things personally. Top-down demands are often just business decisions. Sometimes they're rushed or poorly thought out, but they're not usually personal attacks.
That's a good point. It's so easy to feel targeted when those demands come flying in. But taking a step back and realizing it's not about you can really help maintain perspective.
And finally, remember to prioritize your own growth. If every demand leaves you feeling undervalued and unheard, it might be a sign that you're not in the right environment.
So it's not just about surviving these demands. It's about thriving in our careers and finding work that's fulfilling.
Exactly. Sometimes a change of scenery can be just what we need to reignite our passion and reach our full potential.
It sounds like this is all about finding that sweet spot where we're contributing to the company's goals without sacrificing our own well-being.
Exactly. And it brings us back to that key takeaway from the source learning to manage those top-down demands instead of letting them manage you.
So it's about taking control, setting boundaries, and making sure those requests benefit both the company and the team.
It's about aligning those demands with the overall business goals, using the CSD Matrix to challenge assumptions when needed, and incorporating that upstream thinking with Kanban to create a more structured workflow.
And just as importantly, we need to protect our own mental health so we don't burn out. We can't pour from an empty cup, as they say.
Absolutely. That's where those self-care tips are so crucial. Setting boundaries, saying no strategically, creating slack in our workloads, not taking things personally, and prioritizing our own growth.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground, from recognizing different types of demands to those practical techniques for managing them effectively.
Yeah, and we've highlighted the importance of prioritizing our mental well-being throughout this whole process. It's not just about getting things done, it's about doing them in a sustainable and fulfilling way.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with this. What's one small change you can make today to improve how you handle those requests from above? Maybe it's starting with why, or trying out that CSD matrix, or even just setting a clear boundary with your manager.
Every journey starts with a single step.
That's right. What will yours be? Don't forget to share this deep dive with your colleagues, and let's keep this conversation going. We'd love to hear your experiences and tips for navigating the world of top-down demands. Until next time, stay curious and keep diving deep.